5 have died. In 1930, George Stathakis died in this barrel. But it wasn't the impact that killed him. After going over the falls, his barrel became trapped in the powerful undercurrent below. Caught in its violent waters for 18 hours, he only had enough oxygen for 3 hours. But in 1983, local guide Dave Mundy set out to tame the falls for himself. Costing $16,000, his barrel was 7 feet long and 4 feet in diameter. Weighing in at 1,000 pounds, this steel drum was lined with aluminum and sandwiched with foam. On an overcast October morning, Dave Mundy's silver barrel was pushed over the rails and tumbled down the bank into the icy Niagara River. As it was carried towards the brink, his onboard camera recorded what could be Dave's final moments. The worry for everyone was whether his barrel would be safely thrown clear or get caught under Niagara's deadly white water.
Down, man. Barrel's up. As the barrel was falling, I was counting because I wanted to know the true speed of it. And I counted to 3.5 seconds exactly because I've done lots of skydiving. I've got 1,400 parachute jumps. And I know what falling is all about, and to fall from the top to the bottom is 3.5 seconds exact, not 4 seconds, but 3.5 seconds, which works out to be about 85 miles per hour when you hit the bottom.
Although dangerous, not to mention illegal, Dave Mundy doesn't see his stunt as in any way suicidal.
People say I'm trying to commit suicide all the time. If I want to commit suicide, I wouldn't. Why would you do something that you got a half a chance to live? If you want to commit suicide, take a gun and put it to your head and pull the trigger. That's committing suicide. You go to Niagara Falls, you've got a good chance of living. You want to commit suicide, you don't want to live anymore. I want to keep living.
It seems we all want to get close to the falls somehow. And other, more ingenious and far less dangerous ways of experiencing them have been created. Each year at the Cave of the Winds below the American Falls, a wooden walkway is built so that visitors can get right up close. This ingenious construction is not fixed in any way to the rock. If the water were to suddenly change course, it would be swept away. Down under the roaring falls, Father Louis Hennepin described the noise as so loud it would cause deafness. He was apt to exaggerate, saying the falls were 400 feet higher than they really are. He also said it was possible to drive 4 coaches abreast into the space behind the falls. Another falsehood. But not one that has prevented people trying to get behind them. 125 feet below the Horseshoe Falls is a labyrinth of tunnels, 620 feet long, that take tourists right behind it. Here, the sheer power of the water is thrillingly obvious. Hidden within the veil of white water, incredibly violent forces are tearing at the cliff day after day. These forces have created Niagara, but revealing exactly how they did so means a journey downstream, away from the falls, and back in time 12,600 years.
Oh, that most beautiful sight.
It's
This jet-powered boat is one of the newest ways visitors can experience Niagara. It's constructed of aluminum and uses 3 500-horsepower jet engines to battle against the currents. Driving downstream with the flow of the river only adds to the ride. But next to these rapids, sitting on the headland, is Niagara Glen, a place quite unlike any other in the gorge. This haunting landscape seems a far cry from the noise and power of the river. Yet for Keith Tinkler, this place helps resolve the mystery of what's happening under the falls today. Gigantic boulders the size of houses are strewn about in chaotic fashion, and in them are strange holes big enough to stand up in. They appear to have been drilled into the earth as if the solid rock was as soft as wood. What caused them reveals that Niagara Glen was once subject to the same powerful forces as the falls are today. Called potholes, they're carved by gravel and stones, spun around by the swirling waters at the bed of the river.
Started probably in a shallow depression in the riverbed with water driving gravel in and then driving the gravel down and drilling the hole over time down as far as my feet.
Although now the river flows to one side of the glen, the potholes prove that once this land was directly under the falls at some point in the past.
It's a really wonderful thing when you can reconstruct what the falls used to be like here, and to know that when you're walking on the paths, you're walking on the old river bottom. And to sort of look up through the trees, see the sky, and think of that as the water, and think of it as where the Maid of the Mist would be floating above you. I think it's amazing.
The question is, when were the falls here? Amazingly, fragments of snail and clam shells answered the question. Keith Tinkler has obtained radiocarbon dates from these shells he's dug up at several points along the glen.
The importance of finding the shells here at Niagara Glen, right through the glen, is that we've been able to use them to date accurately the location of the falls through time and to know that they spent 5,000 years retreating through this glen.
Although the falls spent 5,000 years eroding through the glen, they began even further back in time and even farther away. The birthplace of the falls is a further 3 miles downriver from the glen. Seven miles from where they are today, this desolate place strewn with rocks and boulders is where the falls first began. At the end of the last ice age, there was no river here, but instead 2 ancient meltwater lakes and a low cliff now called the Niagara Escarpment. The escarpment stretches for about 700 miles. Above it used to be a glacial lake geologists named Tonawanda, and below it, lapping against the bottom of the cliff, was another called Lake Iroquois. The water flowed between these 2 lakes and fell over the cliff. This is what led to the birth of the falls.
What was happening was, although the upper Great Lakes waters and ice sheets were supplying just as much water as now, they were spilling over the escarpment in 5 different places from a lake called Lake Tonawanda upstream.
Through time, the land tilted, and all the water became concentrated in what was to become the Niagara River. At the time, the water fell only 35 feet, but as Lake Iroquois receded, the cliff got higher, and the falls drop heightened to 80 feet.
And that's when the falls began, because that would have been a really effective process, scouring the weak shales, undercutting the stronger units, and that's when the recession of the falls began.
Retracing their journey upriver means starting at the cliff 12,600 years ago, as the falls cut an incision into the hard Niagara escarpment. Traveling at an average distance of 3 feet a year, they took 2,500 years to move the first 3 miles upriver. Then they hit Niagara Glen. Hard rock and lower volumes of water caused the falls to stall here. They took 5,000 years to move less than a mile. But when the falls reached the whirlpool, they turned a sharp 90 degrees and followed the line of softer sediment. In only a matter of hours, a section of the gorge 1 mile long was blasted away. But it took another 4,500 years before the falls cut back the last 2.5 miles to reach the position we see them in today. Erosion means that as it retreats upstream, the falls should eat back towards Lake Erie, where they will eventually disappear. But having spent the last 12,600 years grinding back the gorge, in only the last 100 years, industry and tourism has intervened, and the falls no longer do what nature intended, but what man desires. Eroding back at high speed, the falls are fast-track geology. But now that movement has been slowed down due to the overwhelming influence of man.
When the first white people saw Niagara Falls in the 17th century, it was a very frightening thing for them. One of the reasons is that all of the wild aspects of nature, mountains and the ocean and waterfalls, were terrifying because these were forces that people had to wrestle with for survival. But today, nature has been tamed. Niagara Falls has been contained.
By the end of the 19th century, North America had embraced the industrial age, and attitudes to Niagara's mighty waters had changed. From fearing them, they were now seen as a source of boundless energy. And entrepreneurs every bit as flamboyant and eccentric as the stuntmen and daredevils came to harness and exploit them. The most bizarre scheme was announced in 1894 by the famous razor blade magnate King Camp Gillette. He believed that there should be one gigantic city in the world, which he called Metropolis. And because it offered a power source that Gillette considered almost infinite, the site of this utopia would be Niagara Falls. He imagined this great future city would house 60 million people and would be the embodiment of perfection, morally as well as materially. Although Gillette's fanciful scheme was never built, it was just the start of ambitious plans to develop Niagara.
Well, Niagara Falls became industrialized partly because of where it was. By the end of the 19th century, the industrial heartland of the United States and Canada had already kind of been established along the southern Great Lakes. But here, right in the middle of it, was this potential power supply. And a lot of people could imagine that this could be a great industrial center if we could find a way of tapping it. And it just so happened that this was also the time when electricity was finally being figured out.
Don't go away.
Oh, much more to come. The whole impact of the falls on our community right here in this next segment.
Yeah, it really is the most fascinating part of the program coming up because it explores the Robert Moses Power Plant and the history of electricity in the area. So please do stay with us.
Absolutely. 845-2200, 1-800-727-1017. Call now, become a member so you can enjoy the rest of the program knowing that you've done your part. You've made your investment.
4,600 miles away in Croatia, where Nikola Tesla grew up.
When Tesla was a really young boy, maybe around 8 years old or so, he happened to be sitting looking through a book with his uncle. And the book had etchings of different tourism sites and different natural wonders of the world. And when he leafed the page to an etching of Niagara Falls, he suddenly became very excited. He told his uncle, you know, one day when I'm older, I'm going to go to America and I'm going to harness the power of the falls.
When Tesla came to North America, electricity had already been invented using direct current. The problem was direct current couldn't be transmitted more than 100 yards. But at Niagara Falls in 1896, Tesla used the power of its water to create a new form of electricity, alternating current. This form of power meant that for the first time ever, electricity could be transmitted for hundreds of miles. Nestling among today's modern pylons at Niagara is all that remains of the first AC power plant in the world.
It was here really that our world, our modern day world began. And when these power stations were constructed, a lot of care was put into it. It wasn't just a utilitarian structure, it was an artistic work.
This is Tesla's transformer house. It was from this building that the world's first alternating electric current was sent 22 miles to the city of Buffalo. Now reduced to storage space, this building was once a cathedral to industry.
The people who were developing power held power, electricity, in awe. It was a miraculous thing that could do things and transform things in ways that could never be done before. And Niagara Falls at that time in general is a very dynamic place. It was on the cutting edge of technology. People would, by people I mean inventors, scientists, would flock from all over the world to come here just to visit the power station. Some would see the power station, not even bother to visit the falls.
Tesla's original power station has long been demolished, but sitting above the falls is the second plant built to his designs. The Rankin Power Station was completed in 1905, and to this day is still producing electricity the way Tesla had intended it to. For this to happen, water from the river must enter the power station before it goes over the falls. It then drops 150 feet and uses force and gravity to turn a huge wheel. That in turn spins magnets around a large copper coil, creating electricity. Tesla's power stations were the driving force behind Niagara's new industrial landscape. The abundance of cheap electricity sparked an industrial boom. Factories sprung up right along the fall's edge. Niagara was even renamed Manchester after the English industrial city.
Niagara Falls had been a very quiet tourism town. It was suddenly a dynamic industrial city that was known the world over. And the industry that resulted from alternating current, from Tesla's ideas, really changed the face of the globe. It changed our way of life.
The hydroelectric power generated by the falls meant that industry continued to grow into the 20th century, sometimes with dire consequences. Chemical spills and pollution has led to health problems. Recession has meant economic decline for the American side of the falls. Today, Tesla, the man so responsible for shaping Niagara's industrial landscape, looks across the river to the Canadian side, home to an industry that shows no signs of decline.
My machine concludes that we need to talk. We need more power for my ability to work. More power!
Canada's side of the falls is home to one of the boom economies of the post-industrial age, tourism. At Clifton Hill, the place where Father Louis Hennepin first scrambled down the rocks to see the falls, things have changed. While the United States embraced heavy industry, Canada opened its door to tourism. The natural spectacle of the falls have attracted fun fairs and arcades since even before the days of the tightrope walkers. At the border crossing on Rainbow Bridge, Patrick McGreevy believes that these contrasting fates reflect the way Canada and the United States view the falls and themselves.
The U.S. and Canada are very similar countries in many ways. But here at Niagara Falls, they seem very different. The Canadian side seems manicured and embellished. It receives a lot of attention. The American side, in contrast, seems messy and neglected. It's almost as if it's the back door of the United States. Americans think of New York City as the entrance to their country, whereas for Canada, this really is the front door of Canada. And one reason for that is that this is the place where Canada established itself as an independent entity. Whereas for Americans, this is sort of a disturbing place because American identity has always been associated with a boundless frontier. And yet when Americans come to Niagara Falls, they're forced to look across this gorge and see another country. Therefore, they're forced to see the end of America.
The border is strictly policed, and often visitors to one side of the falls may not be permitted to enter the other. So experiencing them from either side can be difficult. But because the Canadian side has the classic view, it reaps the benefits of tourism, while America lags behind.
Well, we've been very fortunate because we have a frontal view of the falls, and geography has been very kind to us. So you kind of have to be on the Canadian side to look at the American falls.
The American falls are not only best seen from Canada, geology also means that they are less spectacular than the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. Instead of a deep, wide curve, the American falls are a straight cliff, and they're not as high as the Canadian side because of the huge pile of debris that lies at their base. Suffering from what might be seen as a slight inferiority complex, in 1969 a decision was made to shut off the American falls and remove the pile of giant boulders. A huge dam was constructed between Goat Island and the American shore, diverting all the water to the Horseshoe Falls. Geologists wanted to see how the rocks had eroded, but the hope was to restore the American falls to their full height. But not everyone was impressed.
When I saw the American Falls dry in 1969, to me it looked dead because the water is what makes it alive. It's what makes it Niagara Falls. Take away the water, there's nothing there but a rock ledge.
With the waters cut off, dawn broke on a brown and jagged cliff, scarred with cracks and fissures. At the bottom lay 300,000 tons of rubble. Two broken corpses, a man and a woman, both thought to be suicides, lay in the mud, while millions of coins flung into the seething waters for good luck glittered in the sunlight. The team of engineers and geologists made detailed studies of the exposed cliff and rock strata. After 5 months, they concluded that the rock pile would have to stay. They discovered that the huge pile of rubble was actually holding up the crumbling cliff. There was no telling what would happen if they tried to remove it. No doubt disappointed, the waters were released and the American Falls were returned to their original state. Whether the economy of Niagara thrives on industry or tourism, both depend entirely on the fact that the falls are here. Should the falls continue their erosive journey, hydroelectric power stations couldn't function. So for both Canada and the United States, controlling the falls' every move has become critical. In 1953, a treaty between both countries led to the construction of something that would limit the flow of the Niagara River. Every morning just before 8 a.m., the responsibility of controlling one of nature's most powerful wonders falls to just one man and the push of a button.
Yeah, this is River Control. We open gate number 3, please.
Jutting out from the shore for 1/3 of a mile is a control dam made up of 18 floodgates. Rather than damming the river completely, The gates control where and how much water flows across certain areas of the falls.
In the morning, the control dam is open to establish a minimum falls flow of 2832 cubic meters per second, and that's to provide ample flow for the tourists who come to enjoy the beauty and the scenic panorama of Niagara Falls.
Most tourists are blissfully unaware that during the day, only 50% of Niagara's waters actually go over the falls. But after dark, when the light shows and the fireworks are over, even less, a mere 25% goes over the edge. The rest of the water is diverted to massive power stations downriver. Vast volumes travel along man-made canals and tunnels 6 stories high and wide enough for 4 lanes of traffic. These waterways bypass the falls for 4 miles till they reach gigantic reservoirs. So big, they hold 22 billion gallons of Niagara water. Hewn into the solid walls of the Niagara Gorge is the Robert Moses Generating Plant. Completed in 1961, here man has created a falls of his own. Beneath this thick concrete exterior, the water drops 300 feet, almost twice as high as the falls themselves, enabling the plant to produce more than twice the amount of electricity than other power stations nearer the falls. This is Tesla's legacy. And as over 50% of Niagara's water is now diverted to power plants, the erosion that has taken place throughout the fall's life has been dramatically affected. Without vast volumes of water, the falls have much less power. Without power, they can't erode away the rock as quickly. And so for the time being, the falls can now only erode 1 foot every 10 years. The spectacle that people are so impressed by is in reality a fraction of the true power of the falls. Yet for some, the falls flowing at full capacity for just 1 day would be a dream come true.
There is a popular feeling that 1 day a year we should let the water flow full force over the falls so that people today can see what people 200 years ago could see. They could see Niagara flowing at its full capacity.
But until the consent of the power plants on both sides of the border is given, this remains a dream. The plan also threatens structures like boating docks and fishing piers that have been built along the river. These would be swept away as the river would rise 10 feet. And there are concerns about the erosive damage this would cause to the fragile edge of the falls, making Niagara carve back once again toward its own extinction, though this may take some time.
The falls will eventually recede back to Lake Erie, and that's approximately 20 miles from here. And it's estimated that 10,000 years from now, there will no longer be a falls to look at. So you can see it's a good thing we're looking at this today.
Over the course of the Earth's history, falls as grand as Niagara came and went without any human witnesses. So in geological terms, our love affair with the falls has been as fleeting as it has been intense. And today, the future of this relationship rests firmly in our own hands.
Wow.
Beautiful programming.
We're so excited that we were able to bring this program to you tonight.
It's majestic, and it's right in our own backyard. 845-2200, 1-800-727-1017. You won't remember this, but I remember that period of time in 1969 when the falls were turned off. And it was frightening.
Unbelievable, like they were just gone.
It was frightening because, I mean, there's so much a part of our world here. And to see that engineering was able to do that, on one thing, is a marvel in itself. But to imagine our community without that resource was unbelievable.
Well, and it's the ease of people taking things for granted that suddenly when it's not there anymore, whoosh, you know, just like, you know, we hope that public television is something that you appreciate and that you can take advantage of and support while it's here by going to your phone and making a pledge of support.
And that's why we are here tonight, to ask your investment. And here in this membership opportunity, we'd like to welcome another 20 members. Now, we haven't been completely successful in meeting our goals tonight, and that's where you come in right now. You can help us close that gap, close that shortfall in this membership opportunity with your pledge of membership support. It's a quick phone call. It's a wonderful phone call. You'll be a minute on the phone, and the value of that minute and a half or so will last you the rest of the year, because every time you turn to WNED in the next year, you'll know that it's your member dollars and your support that made that moment possible. Just like in that period of time that it took the engineers to know how to turn off the falls, to know how to control that environment, you're taking that control of your viewing and your investment when you make that call of support right now and invest your resources in the resource of WNED, providing so much to you throughout the course of the year. It's wonderful local and
built to welcome ships into a busy harbor, others built to warn mariners of rocky shoals or islands. Whether protecting ships from peril or marking an entrance to a port, the lighthouse was always a welcome sight to the sea-weary mariner. Early lights on the Great Lakes were built mostly of stone materials and housed the Winslow Lewis lamp. This lamp was a variation of the Argand lamp developed in Switzerland. It contained a circular wick, a mantle, a spherical reflector, and a green glass lens. The lens and reflector were not very effective, and the powders used to clean them wore the lens out quickly. A new system was desperately needed. In 1822, in France, Augustin Fresnel developed the Fresnel lens. The light was refracted by prisms at the top and bottom of the lens, creating a single pane of light, which was then magnified many times by a powerful magnifying glass. This method produced a concentrated beam of light visible for several miles, but it took a full 30 years before the United States government decided to convert American lighthouses to the new innovation. The decision was made after realizing that the lens could be paid for in 3 years with the savings in whale oil used as fuel for many of the lights. A first-order Fresnel lens is about 10 feet high and is used mostly in ocean lights. From there, the lenses decrease in size. The fourth-order lens is about 3.5 feet tall. Third and fourth-order Fresnel lenses, about mid-size, were commonly used in the Seaway Trail lights. Though the lenses on each lighthouse were basically the same, the light emitted was not.
Each lighthouse had a certain characteristic in their light. In other words, it would be on 30 seconds and off 30, on 15 and off 30, something of that nature. And that let the navigator know exactly what port he was off of.
In 1789, Congress passed and President George Washington signed the Lighthouses Act, which established the United States Lighthouse Service. A scandal resulted in a complete revamping of the lighthouse service, and in 1851, the Lighthouse Board was established. The Lighthouse Board renovated most working lighthouses in the U.S. to house the Fresnel lens and established strict standards for lighthouse keepers. In 1939, the Coast Guard took over from the Lighthouse Service, assuming responsibility for all aids to navigation. Please come along with us as we visit the lighthouses of the Seaway Trail.
Brightly beams our Father's mercy from his lighthouse evermore. But to us he gives the keeping of the lights along the shore. Dark the night of sin has settled, loud the angry billows roar. Eager eyes are watching, longing for the lights along the shore. Trim your feeble lamp, my brother, some poor sailor tempest-tossed, trying to make the harbor in the darkness may be lost. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the wave. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman you may rescue, you may save. Philip P. Bliss, 1871.
The Ogdensburg Harbor Light, constructed in 1870, is the second to occupy this low, rocky point where the Oswego River joins the St. Lawrence River. The original lighthouse, which dated to 1834, was demolished in 1871. Lighthouse Point was also the site of Fort La Présentation, established by the French in 1749 to control the passage on the St. Lawrence River between the Great Lakes and Montreal. However, less than a year later, the fort and 2 vessels anchored offshore were burned by the Mohawk Indians. Later, during the War of 1812, the British captured the city of Ogdensburg. For about 25 years, Lighthouse Point was an island. Trees and shrubbery had died away as water washed away the soil and cut a channel between the lighthouse and the main shore. An early keeper was Samuel Penfield, who came in 1888 and died in 1914. Later keepers were James Gunn, who was there when electric lights were installed in the 1920s, and Harold Cook, who lived there until 1942, when the lighthouse was decommissioned. The duties of the Ogdensburg lighthouse keeper were many.
The old kerosene oil lamp was always lighted at sunset, and the fuel tank had to be refilled at midnight. The water level also had to be measured several times a day. Ida Waterman, daughter of Ogdensburg lightkeeper Samuel Penfield.
Not everyone was happy to see the old lighthouse torn down and the new one built in 1870. Some did not like the design of the new building. The Ogdensburg Journal in 1870 compared the new structure to the old lighthouse and announced the new lighthouse a most contemptible structure. Fortunately, the newer lighthouse is as endearing to the residents of today's Ogdensburg as the old one was to the residents of 1870. Later in 1900, the lighthouse's attached tower was raised to 63 feet to increase its visibility. It was decommissioned in the early 60s. The lighthouse is no longer operational and is now privately owned. Crossover Island was so named because at this point, ships traveling the St. Lawrence Seaway crossed from the American Channel to the Canadian Channel. Crossover Island Lighthouse was constructed in 1848 of inferior materials and had to be rebuilt in 1882. When the lighthouse was built, the island was practically bare rock with a few trees on it. A solid rock wall was constructed along the southeast part of its waterfront. The keeper's dwelling was rebuilt in 1882 with the lighthouse. The boathouse was built in 1869 and rebuilt after a fire destroyed it in 1890. In 1899, the color of the lighthouse was changed from brown to white. Obed Robinson was the light's first keeper. He was followed by Samuel Whitney in 1851 and E.C. Robeson in 1856. Daniel Hill, a career keeper for the Lighthouse Service, served at the Buffalo Reef, 30 Mile Point, Ogdensburg, Huron, and Crossover Island lights. He was keeper of Crossover Island from 1909 to 1931. He kept detailed logs. During his career, he rescued more than 400 stranded mariners, the most dramatic occurring when a small biplane crashed just off the island. As the 3 passengers were safely brought ashore, the plane exploded and burned. His son, Ralph Hill, published stories of his childhood memories and his father's life as a lighthouse keeper in the newspaper Thousand Islands Sun and in 2 books now out of print. The light is sometimes called the Ralph Hill Light in his honor. The keeper's 4 children attended a one-room schoolhouse on the mainland, rowed by their father across the 3/4-mile channel in a St. Lawrence River skiff. The Ash House doubled as a smokehouse where his wife smoked hams, fish, and particularly eels. The Hill family harvested up to 200 eels nightly.
They bought their eggs and milk over in the mainland from a farm across here. And when the letter came from the government telling him he was released, it was always in November, around Thanksgiving time, and it was very cold. The family went off and moved into town, and the kids went to school. And he had to stay by himself then until he had permission, had his orders to leave. And then he got his mail over at this farm, and the lady, when his letter came, the lady would go out and hang a sheet on the line, and then he'd walk in, close his suitcase, leave for the mainland. We're ready to go, believe me.
The light was discontinued on April 10, 1942. The island and buildings were sold in 1969 to Maynard and Betty Jo Dutcher, who have substantially renovated the residence and lighthouse. Today, the privately owned light is no longer in service. Constructed in 1870, Sisters Island Light was needed to mark a difficult channel on the Canadian side of the island. However, with the commissioning of the lighthouse, the river channel was moved to the American side of the island. As part of this process, the river at that point would have to be deepened, which entailed the blasting of bedrock at the river bottom. This was an extremely hazardous operation. Divers working from a support barge placed the charges into drilled holes. Lightning struck the barge during a summer thunderstorm, and the dynamite on the barge exploded. 9 crew members were killed. In an unrelated incident, a coal-laden ship strayed from the main channel, striking Upper Brothers Island nearby. Its wreckage remains on the river bottom. The tower, which housed the light, rises about 60 feet. Sisters Island was originally 3 Sisters Islands, or 3 islands that stood next to each other. The space between the islands was eventually filled in, and the islands connected. Captain William Dodge was wounded in the Civil War and given the post of lighthouse keeper. He was appointed Sisters Island Light's first keeper in 1870 and served with his wife for 23 years, then passed the position on to his son, who kept the light for 28 years. Between the two, they logged 51 years as keepers of Sisters Island Light. At first, the lightkeeper had to stay at the light year-round, even though the light was not operated in the winter. Later, the keeper was allowed to go home for the winter months. Around 1890, late at night, the Dodges were awakened by a horrible crash. The passenger steamer Ocean had collided with the barge Kent. With a huge gaping hole in her side, the captain of the Ocean drove his vessel full steam ahead for the rocks at Sisters Island Light. He wanted to get into shallow water, knowing that his ship could not float for more than a few minutes. The keeper, Mr. Dodge, was involved in the rescue. Later, Horace Waltz tended Sisters Island while it was fueled by oil and then by gas. When the St. Lawrence Seaway opened in 1959, the lighthouse was replaced with a nearby buoy. Sisters Island Light is now privately owned and is not operational. The lighthouse cannot be seen from the American mainland. Located on Bush Island, the Sunken Rock Lighthouse marks the east entrance to the Narrows between Wellesley Island and the mainland. Constructed in 1847 and refitted in 1855, the lighthouse is 40 feet tall. Still in active service, it is owned by the St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation, which converted it to solar energy in 1988. The lighthouse was constructed to warn mariners of a submerged rock that was extremely dangerous to ships. The lighthouse's foundation built up the submerged rock into a tiny island. Half of the tiny house was a boathouse, the other half one-room living quarters. The Narrows immediately upstream from Sunken Rock Lighthouse were the site of one of the most recent and spectacular shipwrecks within the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway. On November 20th, 1974, the 640-foot Roy A. Godfrey struck Pullman Shoal off the village of Alexandria Bay. Laden with more than 20 tons of iron pellets, the ship remained afloat for about 4 hours. It was towed to the Coast Guard station on Wellesley Island. Attempts to keep it afloat failed, and the ship capsized and slipped below the surface. It rests today in approximately 250 feet of water in front of the Coast Guard station. Horace Waltz of Sisters Island Light was the last keeper at Sunken Rock. In the early days, he rowed to the island in a St. Lawrence skiff to tend the light. Each morning after extinguishing the light, he covered the costly Fresnel lens with a white linen to prevent the formation of bubbles in the glass. Mr. Waltz was responsible for taking care of both Sunken Rock and Sisters Island. The performance of keepers was regularly evaluated, the very best receiving the star to keep for a year, signifying excellence. Horace Waltz was a recipient of this award for 9 consecutive years, ultimately receiving a permanent gold star with a diamond at its center. Rock Island Lighthouse was built to mark one of the narrowest and most dangerous points on the St. Lawrence River. Constructed in 1882, the lighthouse replaced an earlier lighthouse built on the island in 1847. The first lighthouse had been placed in the middle of the island and was sometimes difficult to see. When a 3-masted schooner and a large steamboat sank within a year of each other after hitting a shoal off Rock Island, a new lighthouse was constructed, this time at the end of a pier stretching into the river. The iron lantern room of the old light was moved to the new one. In 1852, former pirate Bill Johnston was appointed keeper. Johnston was on the losing side during the 1838 Patriot War, an unsuccessful 4-day attempt by a group of Canadians and Americans to take over Fort Wellington near Prescott, Ontario, from the British. Johnson led a raiding party that burned the ship Sir Robert Peel just off the shore of Rock Island. As a result, Johnston was convicted but later pardoned by President Harrison. The light is still sometimes referred to as Johnston's Light. Bill Johnston was not the only strange character to be keeper of Rock Island Light. An undated diary entry of a local resident states, the keeper of Rock Island Light was Mr. Deepolder, who wore a helmet and sailed a small blue skiff, generally standing up. Frank Ward was the last keeper at Rock Island Light. He and his family were stationed here from 1939 to 1941. He was previously stationed at Crossover Island. His widow recounted numerous incidents which occurred during their tenure at Rock Island Light as well as Crossover Island. A frantic woman once came to their door wanting him to locate her husband, a local fisherman who had failed to return home after a day on the river. Mr. Ward was able to find him, stranded on an island after his boat had been capsized by the wake of a large ship passing by. Rock Island Light is the only light on the St. Lawrence Seaway that retains the tower and all of its auxiliary structures. The Fieldstone Smokehouse is from the 1847 lighthouse period. The generator house was built in 1900 and the boathouse built in 1920. These buildings, along with the carpenter's shop and the keeper's house built in 1882, are an accurate picture of maritime life on the river during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Today, Rock Island Light is still operational, guiding ships along the seaway. The Thousand Islands region of the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation maintains Rock Island itself as a park. Volunteers maintain the lawn, plant flowers, and do repairs and painting when necessary. Visitors are free to picnic on the island during daytime hours. Minimal dockage is available. Tibbetts Point marks the entrance into the St. Lawrence River from Lake Ontario. The first lighthouse at Tibbetts Point was erected in 1827. Fueled by whale oil, the light remained in service until 1854, when the present tower was constructed. The steam-operated fog whistle was added in 1896. In 1927, it was replaced by an air diaphone powered by a diesel engine with the blasts automatically timed. The air diaphone was replaced by a radio beacon, which guides ships into the river. The fog whistle still works, but is no longer used because residents of Cape Vincent and nearby Wolf Island complained that the noise shook their homes. The first keeper appointed was Judah Williams in 1827. Several generations of the Montona family kept the light going for over half a century, from 1885 until 1937. Olin Stevens was next in line as keeper, and Edward Sweet was the last civilian light tender.
They would have started out the day probably by climbing those stairs and taking with them a series of instruments to trim the wick, polish the mirrors, clean the glass, clean the reflectors and things like that, and would have lit the, came back at night and then lit the light at an appropriate time, sunset, I suppose. They would have to carry the oil up those stairs like in 5-gallon cans to keep the light going for the next period of time. And they would have done this day in and day out, year in and year out, and I think all year long too, not just when there was shipping around. I think it was a tough life.
In 1939, the Coast Guard officially took over the operation of the light. The lighthouse complex consists of the lighthouse tower, a 2-story keeper's residence built in 1800, a steam fog signal building with several displays, and an iron oil house. The keeper's house was a Coast Guard station up until 1981. It is now an American youth hostel, along with the assistant keeper's house built around the turn of the century. The tower is still an active light maintained by the Coast Guard. It has a 4th-order Fresnel lens that can be seen from 16 miles out. At present, the lighthouse has the only classical Fresnel lens still in operation on Lake Ontario. It is the original lens and is over 150 years old. The Tibbetts Point Lighthouse Society, formed in 1988, has restored the light and constructed a new visitor center and lighthouse museum, complete with gift shop. Between 10 and 12,000 people visit the center and lighthouse every year.
It was a welcome sight at night. I will tell you one experience of my son and 2 of his children came across the lake in a boat that they had just purchased for the first time. I had made this trip, and it started to get dark, and they hadn't arrived. They were overdue, so we were very concerned. And I'll tell you, the welcome light was when they saw the lighthouse. It was just that it was a long trip, and they took the long way around, but they were okay. But that time, the lighthouse meant a lot to them and to me.
It's a landmark or benchmark to the people that use the seaway. Even the pilots use it. It's the beginning of the St. Lawrence River. This is where it begins its trek to the ocean. It's not the easiest place in the world to find if you're coming in from eastern Lake Ontario. It's a little tricky, and it makes it a nice place for a light.
In 1929, the 35-foot lighthouse off the waters of Lake Erie near the shore of Vermilion, Ohio, disappeared. Records show that it had been sent to Buffalo, perhaps to be sold for scrap. A skeleton tower replaced it. Vermilion residents searched without success to locate the old Vermilion Lighthouse. In September 1994, Olin M. Stevens of Columbus, Ohio, discovered an old newspaper article that told of his grandfather's first Lake Ontario assignment as keeper of Tibbetts Point Light in 1937.
Although this is his first duty on Lake Ontario, Charity Shoal Light, visible from Tibbetts Point, is an old friend. The tower upholding the gas lamp on Charity formerly was under Keeper Stevens' charge at Vermilion, near Leroyne. Victim of an ice shove, it was salvaged and taken to Buffalo, where it was assigned to Charity.
The missing lighthouse had been found. The light still operates as a reference point for ships navigating the St. Lawrence Seaway Channel and is located 7 miles off Cape Vincent. Horse Island lies at the entrance to Sackett's Harbor, the nation's most important shipbuilding center during the War of 1812. Headquarters for the U.S. Navy on the Great Lakes, it was home to the thousands of shipwrights, carpenters, sailors, and soldiers gathered to construct, sail, and defend the fleet. During the war, 1/3 of the United States Army and 1/4 of the Navy were stationed at Sackett's Harbor. Horse Island was the site of 2 battles of the War of 1812 and served as the British staging area during the second on May 29, 1813. General Jacob Brown expected that attacking British troops would land at the cove formed by Horse Island, almost a mile from the village of Sackett's Harbor. Though the intended British landing site was actually on the mainland, British soldiers, under heavy fire from the Americans, sought cover on Horse Island. British troops continued to land at Horse Island and began the rush across the shallow causeway between the island and the mainland toward the village. The Americans won the battle that ensued and eventually the War of 1812. Horse Island Lighthouse was originally built in 1831 and later rebuilt in 1870. At around 55 feet, the new lighthouse was taller than the old one. The early keepers had cows, goats, chickens, and horses on the island. Mrs. Harriet Simmons, who became keeper after her husband Schuyler died after 7 years as keeper, had an entire farm at the lighthouse, including chickens that would perch on her shoulders. The isthmus separating Horse Island from the mainland is very shallow, and the keeper took his children to school with a horse and buggy across the isthmus when he could. When the lake froze during the winter months, the light was not operational, and the keeper and his family moved to the mainland. The first light was powered by kerosene and later powered by propane. Solar energy now powers the steel tower, which took over from the lighthouse in 1956. The lighthouse is privately owned and can be seen from the Sackett's Harbor battlefield or by boat. Immediately east of Stony Island lies Stony Point, an anvil-like peninsula that, along with the mainland, shapes Henderson Bay. Stony Point Lighthouse was erected in 1869 with a 73-foot square tower and an attached keeper's dwelling. This light replaced an 1830s lighthouse whose foundation still remains. Wiley Gilbert Nichols was the first lighthouse keeper at Stony Point Lighthouse. He kept the light for 30 years, despite the loss of both arms. The accident occurred when he was 19 years old at a 4th of July celebration at Sackett's Harbor. A shot fired from a cannon severed both arms just below the elbow. He then had hooks fastened to his arms. The left one was fixed so that he could feed himself, the right one so a pen could be attached. In this way, he was able to do all the government reports necessary for the keeping of the lighthouse. His daughters and wife performed the daily chores of keeping the light, filling the lanterns with oil, trimming the wicks, and polishing the brass reflectors. One of the last keepers, Mile E. Eggleston, kept the light for 37 years until 1942. In 1902, he received a gold life-saving medal for rescuing 4 men, a woman, and a dog from a wreck on the lake that December. The lighthouse was removed from service in 1947 when the Coast Guard built an automated light tower nearby. In late June of 1966, a fire started in a nearby barn and spread quickly to the lighthouse, causing severe damage to the structure. The lighthouse was privately owned by that time, and the owners restored the building. The lighthouse has since changed hands several times, and the current owners have further remodeled the property. Up next, the Coast Guard disaster at Oswego West Pierhead Light and the tragic shipwreck of the St. Peter. But first, please take this opportunity to call the number on your screen with a pledge of financial support to your public television station. Your support helps make programs like Lighthouses of the Seaway Trail possible.
What a great show.
I know, and we have so many lighthouses in our own backyard coming up.
Absolutely, and more to see. That's just a little hint of what you'll see coming up. I'm joined by my friend Wendy Dina Sapaglia, celebrating our region's history and some beautiful architecture right in your neighborhood.
Absolutely. We have great news. We have the program that you're watching right now here, available here to you tonight at the $100 pledge level, and that is exclusively gotten through public television.
Absolutely. This program tonight was produced by one of our sister stations in Watertown, New York, celebrating New York State and also Southern Ontario, too. You do see some hint of the Ontario shoreline. In this membership opportunity, though, we would like to welcome 20 more pledges of membership support. That's 19 others, and you, just like you, believing in the programming, enjoying it tonight. More great scenery yet to come, and a couple surprises, too, and a special guest.
Absolutely, and we want to definitely invite you to go to your phone and make that very important call of support around a program that is a local event that Ron Santora heard about through the grapevine and sought out on your behalf, knowing that you would want to see it and that you would be entertained and enlightened by it.
And you know, regional programs like this, you don't always see on other television stations, but WNED has made that commitment to always celebrate our region and always bring you the finest programming, not only of a global and national level, but programming that celebrates our own community. This is a special investment. You're not going to find this in every television station, certainly not even on every public television station tonight, because this is really of appeal to people in New York State and Southern Ontario area because it does celebrate our region. Ron Santora made that investment because he knew how much you would enjoy seeing some very familiar sights and learning more about lighthouses, why they were important in the past, while they're still important present day, and what sort of role they play in our future, either from an architectural model or from a preservation model. Very significant to how we perceive our beautiful waterways. Show your investment for public television tonight. Invest in the future of your own viewing by becoming a WNED member. Now, we would like to welcome 20 calls of member support around this programming. So far, we've welcomed one. That's 19 more to go in this membership opportunity. The numbers are at the bottom of your screen. Our wonderful staff was volunteering their time tonight, along with our friends of Western New York Public Television are here, anxious to take your phone call and to say thank you to you for investing your dollars in the kind of programming that you value and the kind of programming that is so quintessentially WNED. Where else can you find a celebration of lighthouses but on WNED tonight, capping a wonderful evening of local programming that's just for you about our community. 845-2200, 1-800-727-1017. Call now and be amongst the first to have this great video for your home video library.
And that's yours at the $100 pledge level this evening. And I think Sherry had a great idea earlier when we were watching the Niagara program. That is, do it for yourself and absolutely include this in your home library. But what a great gift to be able to donate to the library, maybe at your children's school, or even the library in your neighborhood. Preservation is a very important thing. It's very important in our society right now, especially in our community with all of the great things going on with uncovering the slip of the Erie Canal and really looking to preserving the very own gems that we have in our very own backyard. Preservation is something that's important for your public television station, too. We've been here for 40 years. We're getting to be kind of old here, but you know what? Doing it together, we could be here for years and years to come, preserving quality programming for you and for your family. Public television is the place where historical programs like this began, and there have been so many spin-offs focusing on different programs of historical nature that so many stations have. But it started here on public television, and we still do it the very best, and I think you'll agree with that. One of the greatest things about public television is that we're not just national.
Selkirk Lighthouse at the mouth of the Salmon River is unique in structure and appearance among all the Seaway Trail lights. Its birdcage lantern, a hexagonal dome of small pane glass, wrought iron, and copper plate, was built before the advent of the Fresnel lens in American lighthouses. It is one of only 4 lighthouses in existence to still have the original unmodified birdcage lantern structure. The first permanent settlement of Port Ontario was established at the mouth of the Salmon River in 1801. During the War of 1812, the Port of Ontario became a haven for smugglers. On October 12, 1820, the ship Asp sunk right offshore of Selkirk during a terrible storm. That tragedy became a major argument for the building of the lighthouse. In fact, many vessels had met their fate in the waters off Selkirk. A government engineer determined in the early 1830s that the harbor had sufficient depth and breadth to anchor 30 ships safely. In anticipation of the creation of a major port, the federal government built the Selkirk Lighthouse in 1838. Originally called the Salmon River Light Station, the lighthouse was to be identical to the one in service at Horse Island Light. The birdcage lantern was built to house a parabolic reflector lamp system utilizing 8 lamps and reflectors, visible for 14 miles. The light was fueled by whale oil. The light's first keeper was Lewis Conant, who stayed for 11 years. The keeper was required to maintain 3 lights, one on each of the now long-gone wooden piers at the river's mouth, and the third in the lighthouse. The building of the Erie Canal and the advent of a railway through Pulaski averted the anticipated commercial development of Port Ontario. The light was decommissioned in 1858. Lucius B. Cole, who was keeper from 1849 till 1854, apparently still lived in the lighthouse and kept the light, although officially extinguished, until his death in 1890. Had the light been kept in official service, its birdcage lantern room would have been rebuilt to house the modern Fresnel lens. The light was sold to a hotelier in 1895 and became part of a hotel complex built at the turn of the century. The hotel became famous for both its German cuisine and for the constant comings and goings of smugglers during Prohibition. Over the years, sand, surf, and modern development have changed the look of Port Ontario. As a result, the lighthouse is now somewhat removed from the lake, but still guides smaller boats into the harbor. On August 6, 1989, the light was reactivated and automated. Privately owned, Selkirk Lighthouse is one of the few lighthouses open to overnight guests. Selkirk Lighthouse is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The first lighthouse at Oswego was installed on the grounds of Fort Ontario on the east shore of the Oswego River in 1822 and was active until the mid-1830s. Initially, other than a nominal seasonal fur trade, the early harbor of Oswego saw little activity. With the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825 and the completion of the Oswego Canal in 1828, Oswego became a major port on Lake Ontario. The dramatic increase in trade called for the building of a new lighthouse. The Inner Harbor Light was constructed in 1836 at the end of a wooden pier. With the dawning of the industrial age, the port activity in Oswego took another giant leap in activity in the 1860s. And in 1869, the lighthouse was raised 25 feet and a stronger lens placed at the top, so it would be visible from a greater distance. In 1880, a second breakwater was constructed and the Outer Harbor Light placed on it. That light operated until the early 1930s. For a while, both the inner and outer harbor lights greeted mariners entering the port of Oswego. But with the building of a grain elevator in the 1920s, the pier it was on had to be lengthened, and the inner harbor lighthouse was removed. Modernization was the cause of death of the outer harbor light. The new apparatus had made the light obsolete, and it was decided that rather than upgrade the light, it would be more efficient to build a new, more modern facility that could more easily keep up with the changes in technology. In 1934, the new lighthouse was constructed. The harbor had been widened. The two piers had been rebuilt, this time of stone, and a new breakwater connected them. The Oswego pier headlight was placed at the end of the pier, on the side of the old outer harbor light. The Erie Canal ran from Buffalo to Albany, with a branch to Syracuse, and the Oswego Canal ran from downtown Syracuse to Oswego. It was cheaper and faster to transport goods from Albany to Syracuse, to Oswego, and out into the Great Lakes and vice versa, rather than from Albany to Buffalo. Oswego was a very active port throughout most of the 19th century and saw its fair share of shipwrecks.
Most of the shipwrecks that we've documented tend to be from the latter part of the 19th century. The storms can be pretty nasty on the lake, and especially in November and December, when a lot of them seem to have occurred. The ships would be blown off course, even inside the harbor, along the eastern shoal, just below Fort Ontario, and the boats would actually ground themselves. Sometimes the bottoms would be actually taken right off the boats, but quite frequently they would smack into one another. The cargo would be dumped on the shoal. People who worked for the lumber company were required to go pick it all up and salvage as much as they could, and they apparently seem to have done a pretty good job of that. Quite often we can find ships, sometimes 3 or 4 years after an original accident, appearing in another one in the same area. So they were able to repair them and send them back out with a cargo.
No one lived at the modern lighthouse. Every day, a Coast Guard keeper made the trip by boat out to light the beacon. During a particularly bad storm in December of 1942, the Coast Guard lightkeeper was trapped at the light, unable to make it to shore. After 3 days, the Coast Guard made an attempt to relieve him of his shift, but the storm was still pretty bad and the boat capsized. 6 of the Coast Guard men lost their lives. Shortly thereafter, the Oswego light was automated and remains in use today. The Coast Guard removed the rotating 4th order Fresnel lens in 1995 and replaced it with a new VRB-25 lantern. The light is now solar powered. The old Fresnel lens can now be seen at the H. Lee White Maritime Museum. From the time of the first settlers in 1792, Sodus Bay was considered an ideal harbor for exporting farm products and other commodities. Sodus Bay prospered and became known for its lumber, grain, and coal trade, commercial fishing, ice industry, and shipbuilding. The first lighthouse on Sodus Bay was established in 1825. The original lighthouse was a round tower rising 40 feet. The existing lighthouse replaced it in 1871 when the need for extensive repairs was recognized. The tower was fitted with a 4th order Fresnel lens. The stone for the construction of the new lighthouse was transported across Lake Ontario from Kingston, Ontario. During the 76 years the old and new lighthouses were in service, from 1825 to 1901, 15 keepers were responsible for the care and operation of the light. The first keeper was Ishmael D. Hill, a veteran of the War of 1812. On October 26, 1898, the schooner St. Peter, loaded with 607 tons of coal, left Oswego bound for Toledo, Ohio. Captain John Griffin, his wife Josephine, and a crew of 4 men were unaware of a severe winter storm moving east from Chicago. As the ship approached the mouth of the Niagara River, a 70-mile-an-hour gale struck with full force. The storm forced Captain Griffin to bring the ship about and make a run back down the lake. With reduced sail, the ship passed Braddock Point Lighthouse and the light at Charlotte-Genesee. Near Sodus Point at Bear Creek, the captain ran the flag at half-mast, signaling distress. Shortly thereafter, the ship capsized and sank in 110 feet of water. 2 days after the sinking, Captain Griffin gave this account.
All at once, she gave a lurch to port and shipped a heavy sea. At the next wave, she gave another lurch and went down without any warning. We were all on deck. I saw my men floating around in the water. I spoke to my wife several times and tried to get to her. At last, she said she was tired and couldn't hang on any longer. She called to me, "Goodbye," and threw up her hands and went down. Captain John Griffin, October 28, 1898.
Captain Griffin was the only survivor. In 1834, the first piers made of wood were erected at the entrance to the bay and a beacon placed at the end. A permanent beacon called the Sodus Outer Light was installed in 1870. In 1901, 4 concrete piers were built to replace the wooden ones. Improvements were made to the pier light, and the Lighthouse Board determined that this beacon was sufficient and decommissioned the shore light. The keeper's residence was used from 1901 to 1953 to house personnel maintaining the pier light. The light on the pier was fully automated in the late 1940s, so a keeper was no longer needed. The last keeper was Edwin Ward, who retired in 1953. In 1984, the U.S. Coast Guard turned the lighthouse and its building over to the town of Sodus Point. Today, the old Sodus Lighthouse is maintained by the Sodus Bay Historical Society. Here, visitors can climb to the top of the lighthouse. The museum holds sailing, shipping, and lighthouse artifacts, lighthouse artwork and photography chronicling the history of Sodus Bay, a second-floor maritime library, and gift shop. During the summer months, the protected and scenic harbor of Sodus Point is a magnet for commercial and recreational boaters. The lighthouse bell in the front yard was a rescue bell to be rung when help was needed. The Fresnel lens was installed in the tower in 1988. This is not the original lens, but the one used in the lighthouse on the pier. The light can be lit on special occasions with special permission. The gazebo was constructed in 1990 and is used for outdoor concerts during the summer. The inner beacon on the south end of the West Pier was built in 1895 and later torn down. The outer beacon at the north end of the West Pier was constructed in 1870, improved in 1901, and replaced in 1938 by the present light. The light is 45 feet tall and is at the end of an 800-foot concrete pier. The beacon is still in use today. In 1805, Congress established the Port of Genesee. The port, however, was dangerous. It was surrounded by marshlands and the river partially blocked by a sandbar. A lighthouse was essential. In 1822, the Charlotte-Genesee Lighthouse was erected on a bluff overlooking the mouth of the Genesee River and the port of Charlotte. Shifting sandbars made it difficult for captains to find a safe entrance to the river. In 1829, the first piers were built to control the problem. A lighthouse was placed at the end of the pier in 1838, but was knocked over by the wind. In 1880, a lighthouse of cast iron was built at the end of the pier and eventually transferred to Cleveland. A third lighthouse was built on the end of the pier in 1884, and that light was taken down in 1930. The two-room keeper's residence, built in 1822 along with the Charlotte-Genesee Lighthouse, was painfully small. The house was replaced in 1863 by the present brick structure. The port of Genesee was a busy port. Ships full of grain, potash, lumber, and wheat arrived and departed continually. Later, Charlotte was a hub for steamships and the railroad. In the early 1900s, ferries transported coal to Canada. Wind and wave action redistributed the sandbars of the river, creating a beach at the base of the bluff. Ontario Beach developed into a big amusement park around 1870, lasting until 1920, and was considered the Coney Island of the West. As the years wore on, the piers had to be lengthened and the beach grew, causing the lighthouse to be somewhat removed from the water's edge. In 1881, the Lighthouse Board removed the light from service, although the residence continued to be used by lighthouse service personnel. The lantern room was moved to the new lighthouse at the end of the West Pier in 1884.
So the lighthouse keeper had to get his supplies out to the end of the pier, which is almost a half a mile away. And that could be in pretty stormy weather. They had a walk on the pier to hold on to the railing so you didn't get washed away. And it was 7 days a week. There were no holidays. There were no vacation days. He was supposed to keep the lantern going, highly polished, spick and span at all times. And if the keeper didn't feel well, some member of his family would have to take up his job because you could not let that light go out.
The keeper's house continued to be used by the lighthouse service personnel to service the pier light, but the tower next to the house was barren and empty. The outer light was automated in 1940. In 1982, the Charlotte-Genesee Lighthouse Historical Society took over the lighthouse. 100 years after the removal of the lantern room in 1984, students from Edison Technical High School built a new lantern room, and it was placed on top of the tower. A new lens was also installed in 1984. The Society maintains a museum and gift shop inside the keeper's house. Tours are available. The Braddock Point Lighthouse is actually located on Bogus Point, 3 miles to the west. It was supposed to be erected on Braddock Bay, but Bogus Point stuck out farther. Architect Lieutenant Colonel Jared A. Smith based his design on the 1829 Cleveland Light, which was torn down in 1895. The ornate brass lantern, Fresnel lens, and metal work from the Cleveland Light were used to complete the Braddock Light. Completed in 1896, the complex included the Victorian Keeper's House and the 110-foot red brick octagonal tower. Keepers of Braddock Point climbed the tower's 118 circular steps at least twice a day to maintain what was considered to be the brightest light on Lake Ontario. The lens transmitted a powerful 20,000 candle power beam visible some 18 miles out on the lake, its light guiding passing ships eastward to Rochester or westward towards the upper Great Lakes. There used to be a road out in front of the lighthouse, between the lighthouse and the lake, but in 1972, Lake Ontario overflowed its banks and the road was lost. The Braddock Point Lighthouse operated for nearly 60 years and was extinguished on January 1st, 1954. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. Coast Guard removed the upper two-thirds of the tower due to extensive structural damage. Soon, the house was full of debris and in ill repair. The present owners bought the house in 1986 and over the years have restored the house to its original beauty. They have made every attempt to renovate and furnish the house as it might have appeared in the early 1900s. Walls that had been removed were replaced. The tower was rebuilt in 1995 to a height of 55 feet. The Coast Guard relit the light on February 28, 1996. Mile Point Lighthouse was erected in 1875 along Lake Ontario's shoreline near the mouth of the Golden Hill Creek. The lighthouse derived its name from being located at a point 30 miles east of the Niagara River. The site was selected to warn vessels of a treacherous sandbar and dangerous shoal where several vessels had been shipwrecked in the prior 2 centuries. Perhaps the largest of the ships was the English naval frigate, the HMS Ontario, which met its fate on Halloween night in 1780. 88 passengers, including the retired commander of Fort Niagara, lost their lives. An Army payroll of $15,000 in gold and silver was also reportedly lost in the disaster, but no gold or silver was ever found. In 1817, a ship called the Mary went down at 30 Mile Point. Around 1834, Daniel Cartwright, a local farmer who pastured his cows near Golden Hill Creek, observed several sailors row up the creek and excavate a chest before returning to their ship. Mr. Cartwright felt it might have been a chest of gold buried by survivors of the Mary. For years, the story attracted treasure hunters to the creek. More recently, in March of 1957, the ship Collier ran aground on a sandbar east of 30 Mile Point Lighthouse. A number of other ships also shipwrecked near the lighthouse. When the lighthouse was built, ships usually operated within 5 miles of shore, rather than the 10 or 15 miles out like they do today. The gray stones used to construct the lighthouse and attached residence came by ship from Chameau Bay near Watertown, New York. 70 feet high with a circular steel stairway, the tower offers a panoramic view across the lake to Canada. The beam from its 2,000-pound third-order Fresnel lens could be seen from a distance of 18 miles. Eventually, the keeper's house was converted to accommodate 2 families. Each keeper had a busy 24-hour shift.
The whole family worked. The wife and the kids usually did work around the grounds. The lighthouse keeper would tend to the lens. That was his main job. They also did maintenance around the lighthouse. It was hard, of course, a lot of isolation. There was a few farms around, so they did have people around them, but not many. It wasn't like they were in the middle of a city or a harbor. The ship would come every 3 months to resupply the lighthouse. And they usually had their own garden and chickens, and some had cows, depending on how much of a farmer they really were. But they were pretty self-sufficient.
The light operated every year until the end of December or the first part of January, and then would start again after the ice melted in March or April. In 1935, the Coast Guard assumed ownership and maintained the light for several years. With the erosion of the sandbar, however, the need for the light had ended. On December 17, 1958, the light was decommissioned, the Fresnel lens removed, and the lighthouse doors closed. Today, the lighthouse is the property of New York State and is now part of Golden Hill State Park. The first floor of the keeper's house has been extensively renovated and is open to the public. Most of the original buildings on the property still exist. The old horse stable and barn, constructed at the same time as the lighthouse, is now a garage. The lighthouse was isolated, and the horses and carriage provided the keeper with an important link to the outside world. This building is the original outhouse. This building houses a well and pump. The keeper and his family would carry drinking water into the lighthouse in the years before the installation of electric pumps and water lines. This circular red building once stored the kerosene used to power the light. Nearby are campsites, picnic areas, and marina with a boat launch. During the summer months, visitors can tour the grounds and keeper's dwelling. The lighthouse now operates as a private landmark lighthouse, which means that boaters use the lighthouse to tell where they are. A modern plastic lens with a low-power light was installed in 1998. The Niagara River, joining Lake Ontario and the western Great Lakes, has served as an important harbor and military base of operations since the colonial period. With the increase in military and commercial traffic precipitated by the American Revolution, the need for a navigational aid at the river's mouth became evident. Eventually, 4 lights, including one on the Canadian shore, would be erected at or near Fort Niagara. The first Fort Niagara light was established on the roof of the fort, or castle, in 1781 or 1782. This light was the earliest unofficial lighthouse on the Great Lakes. It was in use until around 1803 and was removed by 1805. Next came the Newark Light, built in 1804 by the British garrison at the site now occupied by Fort Mississauga. It survived the intense battles of the War of 1812, but it was removed from service in 1814 and not replaced. The federal government re-established a light atop the French castle of Fort Niagara in 1823. With the completion of the Erie Canal in 1825, Niagara River commerce decreased considerably, and the port at Niagara lost much of its importance. The ports of the lower river retained some local trade, however, and so a light was still considered necessary. The keeper resided in a stone cottage that existed on the site of the current frame house, which replaced it in 1893, adjacent to the modern light. On the occasion when the troops were withdrawn from Fort Niagara, he temporarily resided in the castle. By the 1860s, the location of the light was becoming inconvenient and inefficient. Military officers living in the French castle complained that the lighthouse keeper had to walk through the building carrying oil for his lamp. The existing stone light went into service in 1872. The Fresnel lens was moved from the castle to the top of the new tower. In 1900, the tower was raised 11 feet in order to increase its visibility, so that the light could be seen from 25 miles out on Lake Ontario. The light was eventually electrified and maintained as an automated beacon by the Coast Guard. In 1993, the light was decommissioned, and the Fresnel lens was removed for safekeeping in 1995. The lens is stored at Fort Niagara for possible later exhibition. During the summer months, the lighthouse is a museum, gift shop, and information center. Old Fort Niagara, within Fort Niagara State Park, is a National Historic Landmark. Built by the French in 1726 to monitor the fur trade out of the Great Lakes Basin, it was lost to the British during the French and Indian War.
The fort stayed in British hands. Through the American Revolution, fort was used as a base for Loyalist and Native American raiding parties who hit the New York and Pennsylvania frontiers. Then in 1796, the fort was turned over to the United States as a result of Jay's Treaty, and the American Army marched in and held the fort until December of 1813, when during the War of 1812, the British launched a surprise night attack on the fort and captured it in about a half an hour. And so the British regained the fort, held that until the end of the War of 1812, and then in 1815 the fort was restored to the U.S. Today it's a museum and historic site there where people can go and visit and see really the evolution of a fortress over the period of a couple hundred years.
The fort contains the most complete collection of 18th century military architecture in the country, along with unique examples of military engineering and important archaeological resources. Old Fort Niagara holds several annual historic events during the summer. The fort is open year-round. Up next, the lighthouse built on quicksand, and the lighthouse destroyed by a collision with a ship. But first, please take this opportunity to call the number on your screen with a pledge of financial support to your public television station. Your support helps make programs like Lighthouses of the Seaway Trail possible.
We're getting close. We're in the Niagara region now.
We just saw Old Fort Niagara.
And what's to come? The Buffalo Lighthouse and the Barcelona Lighthouse. Yet to come in this next segment. So, become a member right now so you can watch the rest of the program proud of your community, proud of your commitment, and proud of the fact that you're a WNED member.
Absolutely, and don't forget at the $100 pledge level, you can get your very own copy of Lighthouses of the Seaway Trail, exclusively received here through your membership support, and traces you all through the lighthouses you've seen in the first two segments, as well as the segment coming up. So this can be yours at the $100 pledge level.
And you know, we'd like to welcome 20 more pledges of membership support in this membership opportunity. That's 19 people and you who care about the programming, who love the historic and architectural wonders of a lighthouse, who really embrace that symbolic caretaking that a lighthouse represents when you see it. Or perhaps you're someone who just loves local history. Well, here is your chance to invest in local history. WNED is so proud to produce this show, or to premiere the show for you tonight, produced by one of our sister stations, but aired on WNED just for you. Why? Well, not every station would take the time or the dollars or the resources to show a program that has appeal to just our community. Because WNED is here for you in Western New York and Southern Ontario, we made that commitment, and it was made possible because someone just like you several months ago became a member and pledged member support. That support allowed Ron Santora, our program director, to purchase this program and make it available to you tonight for your viewing pleasure. When you become a member of WNED tonight, you've invested in that commitment to preservation of local history and preservation of regional programming. Your dollars go to work putting programs just like this one in our schedule and keeping it here for you. 845-2200, 1-800-727-1017. If you can pledge $200 tonight, maybe accept 2 of the $100 thank you gifts, that wonderful video. Keep one for yourself, send one to a friend, or maybe give one to your local library, spreading the preservation effort and your member support.
We're working on a goal of 20 calls in this membership opportunity. We have welcomed 2. Thank you if that was you that went to the phone. And if not, it is absolutely your turn, and this is your personal invitation to make a pledge of support at 845-2200 or 1-800-727-1017. We're so proud to be able to stand here behind wonderful programming like Lighthouses of the Seaway Trail and earlier Niagara, a Naked Planet special. Both wonderfully produced programs with a local bent, absolutely here to entice you into our history and in celebrating our absolute wonderful area that we live in. And we're very proud to be able to bring you the best programs possible here in our membership opportunity and in our invitation for you to go to the phone and make a pledge of support. We have wonderful volunteers and staff members here who are here to encourage you and to welcome you into the WNED membership family. And it really is a family. We work here together on your behalf, and we absolutely use your member dollars to seek out the very best programs and programs that you like. membership time is often a time for us to kind of gauge the direction that you want your public television station to go in. When we get lots of calls around a Sarah Brightman show, which is exactly what happened the other night, we know that that's a program that if another program comes up with Sarah Brightman in it, that would be a program that we'd be interested in buying for you. If there is a program like this and we receive great support, then what we know and what that encouraging phone call sound means to us is that this is the direction that you want your public television station to go in. But those programming decisions are tough, especially when we don't have as much money in the coffers as we wish that we did. When we don't have enough funds, we have to make some very difficult decisions. And sometimes when we're sitting around a conference room table and we're thinking about, you know, do we want to pick this show or do we want to pick this show? I am absolutely heartbroken at it over some of the shows we can't bring to you because we don't have the membership dollars possible. Imagine how strong and how wonderful this station could be and how much more diverse in programs that we can bring you with your member dollars. It's really in your hands. And in this day and age where really one person hardly makes a difference in anything, trust me when I say your call and your dollars make all of the difference in the world in membership here in your public television station. And that's why it is your public television station. So please take ownership of it tonight and put some financial backing in the form of a pledge by calling 845-2200.
We're joined by Mike Vogel again, an editorial writer for the Buffalo News, author of several books on local preservation effort, and also one of the preservationists who helped save the Buffalo Lighthouse back when it was first threatened in 1961. What led preservationists to that effort?
I haven't been working on it quite that long, but almost. It just seems that way. Even though the lighthouse is depicted on the official seal of the city of Buffalo, we came very close to losing the structure in 1961. There was a project to widen the river mouth to make it easier for freighters to get in and out, and the Corps of Engineers decided that as part of that, they would be destroying the lighthouse, demolishing the Buffalo Lighthouse. There was a citizen campaign, a newspaper campaign to save the structure. And it was successful. The Buffalo Historical Society took it over briefly, turned it into the logo for the Historical Society.
And it still is today?
And it still is today. And did a little bit of restoration on it. There was a fundraising drive, a public subscription drive, and they did some restoration that basically saved the tower. It went into a little bit of disuse then, and in 1985, the Coast Guard was concerned about some cracks in the tower, and they asked us to form a nonprofit group to do a full restoration, and that's what we've been doing ever since.
So that's the power of people coming together and supporting something that they value and cherish.
That's
that power and that passion helps save things and keep them accessible not only for us, but also for future generations.
That's true, and videos like this are a very powerful tool for us in the lighthouse preservation movement as well, because it gives us a chance to tell the story of the lighthouses, to show the towers to people who might not be able physically to climb the towers, to share the history, and to bring a sense of community together, to make this important to the community, and that's what this whole drive is all about.
This membership campaign right now is better because you made a commitment of membership support. If you haven't done so yet, there is still time. We've taken 5 pledges in this membership opportunity, 15 more to go. Show your passion for the preservation of public television in your community. Make that pledge of support right now. Your dollars stay in this community, protecting and preserving the programming that you value. So please call now. Talk to some of our volunteers. You'll see Mike in the next segment of the program, too.
Thanks, Sherry and Mike. Just a quick reminder that at the $100 pledge level, you can have this program in your home video library, and that's a $100 pledge. You can spread that out over a couple months, or you could pay for it right up front. It's entirely up to you how you'd like to make that payment. And at the $100 level, you could get one for yourself, but at the $200 level, you could certainly get one to enlighten generations to come in the form of perhaps donating it to your library or your children's library. And you can do that by calling 845-2200 or 1-800-727-1017 right now. We are working diligently on a goal. As I have said earlier, we have welcomed 5 or 6 calls, and that's great. We have a great start, but we need to be able to reach a goal. We did not reach the goal in the first opportunity, I'm sad to report, but I know that's going to turn around right now because I see you walking over to the phone and making that commitment in the form of a pledge, 845-2200 or 1-800-727-1017. You know, I know this is hard for you to believe, but there are some people who do not think that this subject matter is interesting in the least. They're not watching watching this show. They're watching some other show right now that doesn't have anything to do with lighthouses. They don't want to know about lighthouses. And I really think that it would be very unfair of us to go to them because they're not here and ask them to make a pledge of support around a program that they don't want to watch and that they're not interested in. We're not doing that. We're asking you, the person sitting in your living room watching this show, being entertained, enriched, enlightened about a program like this that really thinks that this is their alternative when they turn to WNED, that WNED is the station that realizes that you want to learn about lighthouses and that you are willing to support it. It is the direction your public television station can continue to go in if you make a pledge of support and cast your vote for programs like Lighthouses of the Seaway Trail. Call right now.
6 calls in, 14 more calls to go, and just another minute or so in this membership opportunity. Still time for you to call. Volunteers are anxious to talk to you, to thank you and welcome you for your membership investment tonight. You know, just like a lighthouse was that beacon of salvation, that welcoming light on the water for sailors at sea, WNED has been that beacon for you, enlightening you and telling you where the most valuable and meaningful programming would be on the television dial for you. For the past 41 years, WNED has represented programming that you can trust and value, whether you're someone who's interested in preservation efforts or local history, science or nature programming, performance programming, kids programming, how-to program. WNED has been that beacon for you, enlightening you toward what is good and meaningful and commercial-free when you're looking for a place to turn for good, solid television and good, solid information and educational value and good entertainment. WNED has been your place to turn to. Tonight we're asking you for your investment and preserving all that is wonderful about WNED, putting high-quality, non-commercial programming on your television, especially programs that have a local or regional interest that you're not going to find anyplace else but on WNED without commercial interruption. Please make that quick call of membership support now, 845-2200, 1-800-727-1017. Please pledge at that $100 level. The video, Lighthouses of the Seaway Trail, is beautiful, wonderful for your home video library. Great to share with someone maybe who's left our community. I know I'm going to be sending a copy to a friend of mine who grew up in Sodus, who knows the Sodus Point Lighthouse very, very well. A great gift to someone, a good reminder of this community in this region, or perhaps something you can share with a library or a community center or a classroom that's important to you. Sharing that information, sharing that knowledge, investing in local history. Mike Vogel is going to be in the next segment. You'll hear all about the Buffalo Lighthouse. Call now and thanks.
We'd like to thank Pranzo Ristorante for donating the food for tonight's TV volunteers. Pranzo Ristorante, serving Italian cuisine in the Radisson Hotel and Suites near the Buffalo Airport.
In 1805, Congress named the small frontier settlement of Buffalo a port of entry on Lake Erie. At that time, Buffalo Harbor was little more than a sand-clogged creek mouth. In 1811, plans were made to build a lighthouse, but the outbreak of the War of 1812 and subsequent British burning of Buffalo in 1813 put those plans on hold. After the war ended, marine traffic into Buffalo increased. The port urgently needed a lighthouse and improvements to the harbor. The first Buffalo lighthouse was lighted in 1818, making it and the Land Lighthouse in Erie, Pennsylvania, the first official lighthouses on the Great Lakes. The New York State Legislature also authorized money for improvements to the harbor, and piers were built. On the night of October 31st, 1821, the first steamship on the Great Lakes, the Walk in the Water, was caught by a gale just off Buffalo Harbor and was beached a few yards from the lighthouse. A survivor of the wreck told the tale.
The boat struck a beach in a fortunate spot for the safety of the passengers and crew, near the lighthouse, and all were saved. The warm fireside we gathered around at the lighthouse was comforting to our chilled limbs, and our hearts warmed with gratitude to God for deliverance from our peril. Mrs. Alanson W. Welton, survivor of the Walk in the Water.
With the dedication of the Erie Canal in 1825 and the subsequent increase in marine traffic, the original lighthouse was declared inadequate. It was set too far back in the harbor and was often obscured by the smoke of the village. A new light was completed in 1833. The new light rose 68 feet and was erected on the end of a 1,400-foot stone pier. It was fitted with a Winslow Lewis Argand lamp. This lamp, now housed at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, is the only known argand lamp still in existence. It is the original lamp used in the Buffalo main light. The keeper's quarters remain more than 1,000 feet away, on the land where the original lighthouse had stood.
The big drawback for keepers here was that the quarters were at the base of the pier on the land side, and the lighthouse was out along the pier. And in times that could be quite exciting. In 1844, there was a huge gale here that was followed by a seiche, which is the Great Lakes equivalent of a tidal wave, in effect anyway. A storm that blew hard for 3 days and was followed by a very quick 180-degree wind shift that sent a wall of water across the lower city. Scores of people were killed in that. The county hall and the city hall were turned into temporary morgues. There was great loss of life, a lot of ships driven ashore. The pier on which the lighthouse stands was actually breached by that storm, and a schooner was driven right through it without touching either side. So that walk along the pier would have been, in storms at night, would have been quite interesting.
Later, in 1854, the light was heightened to 76 feet and fitted with a 4th-order Fresnel lens. But even this wasn't enough. Commerce in the port of Buffalo was still growing at a rapid pace. It was not unusual for 100 or more ships to visit the port of Buffalo every day.
Well, Buffalo Harbor is actually comprised of 2 parts. The inner harbor, which is the river harbor, which we're standing along right now, and the outer harbor, which is a section of the Lake Erie shoreline that's enclosed by one of the longest breakwater systems in the world. The inner harbor, if we were standing here 100 years ago, you could almost have walked across to the other shore, across the decks of ships. It's a history of a very congested harbor, pushing the need for expansion continually. At the turn of this century, this was the 7th busiest port in the world.
Marine traffic in Buffalo Harbor continued to increase, and the need for more lights was urgent. Horseshoe Reef Light was built in 1856. The lighthouse was actually built on Middle Reef in Canadian waters. Today, it stands in American waters. The lighthouse never moved, the border did. The British government gave the United States permission to build the lighthouse in Canadian waters. In 1913, an international commission moved Canada 100 feet to the west of Horseshoe Reef Light. The light was a desolate station, hard to reach in rough weather because of the reef. The light went dark in 1920. The ruins of Horseshoe Reef Light can be seen offshore. In 1868, a detached 4,000-foot breakwater was constructed over 2,000 feet out in front of the lighthouse. The Breakwater Lighthouse was built in 1872. The Breakwater Lighthouse was a magnet for ships. It was hit by a tug in 1899, by a barge in 1900, by a freighter in 1909, and by a steamer in 1910. The accidents weakened the structure, and in 1914, the Breakwater Light was rebuilt. That same year, the Buffalo main light went dark. The Breakwater's new beacon was deemed bright enough. In 1918, Marjorie Suggs' grandfather became keeper of the Breakwater Light. She remembers her grandfather making the trek out to the light.
On the reservation where we lived, there were houses for all of the lighthouse keepers. And they had 24-hour shifts, and a little boat would pick them up every morning and take them out to the lighthouse with their supplies and all the clothing they needed for the next 24 hours. And then they'd come back in a day later, and 2 more people would go out with the launch and then bring them back. In his diaries, we have evidence of where they couldn't get back because of the weather. So they would just do a double shift and wait until the weather cleared and then come back themselves. While my grandfather was the light keeper there, it's said that he was very particular and even told some people visiting from Washington to get off of the varnished floors and stay on the rug. And as a result of that, I think he had the gold medal for 3 or 4 years running for perfection inside the lighthouse.
On July 26, 1958, the huge lake freighter Frontenac swung out of the Buffalo River towards open water. A Coast Guard keeper on duty at the Breakwater Light noted with alarm that the ship's swing was much wider than usual. He watched the commotion on the ship as they tried to right the course, but it was too late. The Frontenac rammed the Breakwater Light with such force it knocked it backward 20 feet and gave it a permanent tilt. In 1961, that light was demolished and this one built to replace it. This modern Breakwater Light was automated from the start. Buffalo Intake Crib Light was built in 1871. The South Buffalo South Side Lighthouse was built in 1903, automated in 1962, and taken out of service in 1992. Sometimes light ships were used to help guide ships into Buffalo Harbor. A light ship was simply a ship with a beacon of light that functioned as a lighthouse. The light ship could be moved if needed and could be placed in areas where it would be extremely difficult to build and man a lighthouse. The light ships were built to withstand all kinds of seas and were anchored solidly in place. The Light Vessel 82 was one such light ship stationed near the Buffalo Harbor. During a fierce storm in November of 1913, the ship's beacon, which should have been visible for miles, vanished. It had become a victim of the 80-mile-an-hour winds, driving snow, and pounding waves of Lake Erie. More than a dozen ships and nearly 250 sailors met their end in that storm. Light Vessel 82 was only the second light ship in the Lighthouse Service's history to sink on station, and the first to go down with the loss of all hands. 6 men died. The light ship was later salvaged from the bottom of Lake Erie and incredibly was restored and put back into service again on the Great Lakes. In the early 1960s, the Army Corps of Engineers announced plans to widen the river mouth and demolish the Buffalo Main Light. But public protest and a Save the Light campaign resulted in the restoration of the long-neglected tower. The light from 1833 became Buffalo's oldest building, still standing on its original site. In 1985, the Buffalo Lighthouse Association was formed, which undertook further improvements to the tower. A new lens was placed in the tower, and it was relit to open the first International Friendship Festival in 1987. It is now lit for show only, intentionally kept weak to avoid confusing mariners. The lighthouse can best be viewed from the Erie Basin Marina. Situated on a bluff overlooking Lake Erie and Dunkirk Harbor, Dunkirk Lighthouse has historically served the dual role of aiding Great Lakes navigation and guiding vessels through the difficult approach to the harbor. In its day, Dunkirk Harbor was a busy port, but gradually as the city and port of Buffalo to the north grew, the shipping trade migrated there. The first lighthouse was commissioned in 1826 and rebuilt in 1857 to house the Fresnel lens. However, because of the eroding coastline, that lighthouse was torn down. The present light was built on the same property, but further back from the coastline in 1875. Bricks from the original keeper's house were used to construct the foundation for the new keeper's house. The original tower was moved next to the new keeper's residence, but it was decided that the old tower's exterior did not match well with the Victorian-style house. So the construction crew built a square brick tower around the original round one. Inside the tower, visitors today can climb the ornate circular cast iron stairway up to the light. At the top of the tower sits the original Fresnel lens, installed in 1857. In addition to the lighthouse on land, there were several lighthouses placed on a pier that jutted out into Lake Erie. The first and second ones collapsed under the weight of the ice that would coat it in winter. The third one was torn down in 1939 and taken to Buffalo. The lighthouse keeper and his family lived at the lighthouse year-round. Winters on Lake Erie could make life difficult.
The lighthouse keeper used to use the horses to go into town and take the kids to school when they could get there, and listening to some of the stories, some of the, they had some relatives coming to visit them here, and there was like, ended up with 35 in the house for 3 days when they got stranded by the snow. And they used to tell us that the lighthouse keeper would run a line from the house to the driveway, down the driveway to the road, so that when the school children would come, in the wind, when the snow, in the wintertime, they would know where it was a blizzard, they could hang on to the rope and it would tie them, take them right to the house.
The Lake Erie weather was tough on ships, too, and Dunkirk Harbor saw more than its fair share of marine tragedy. The Annabelle Wilson sank in a great storm in 1913. The Passaic sank in 1885. The Comet sank on November 11, 1835, just east of Dunkirk Harbor. In 1841, the Erie St. Cloud, carrying immigrants out of Buffalo, caught fire when someone kicked over a can of turpentine near a hot smokestack. Only 35 of the 250 people on board were rescued. The city of Rome was a jinxed ship, catching fire not one, but 3 times, finally sinking on May 7th, 1894. More recently, in December 1950, the tugboat Sachem sank about 6 miles from Dunkirk Harbor. All hands were lost. The lighthouse is now the site of the Veterans Park Museum, maintained by the Dunkirk Historical Lighthouse and Veterans Park Museum Association. The complex includes 3 buildings. The keeper's residence commemorates the life of the lighthouse keeper. A museum building houses displays of the Coast Guard, submarine services, sunken ships, and lake freighters. The 3rd building includes a gift shop. A 47-foot-long lighthouse buoy tender from Wisconsin sits on the property. The keeper of the property, Harold Lawson, has a vested interest in lighthouses.
My grandfather was a tall ship captain. I got all his sailing papers. He migrated at 16 years old from Christiania, Norway to Liverpool, England, and started sailing at 16 years of age. He traveled all the way around the world, Bombay, China, the North Atlantic, South Atlantic, Mediterranean, New York City, and he married my grandmother over in England, and they migrated to Buffalo. And during the winter, my father always talked about how he used to take his lunch pail down to him and he'd walk across the ice at that time, and he was a relief keeper for the Horseshoe Reef Lighthouse.
The light itself is automated and maintained by the Coast Guard. It operates year-round. The lighthouse and grounds are open to the public most days from April to November each year. In 1828, Congress appropriated $5,000 for building a lighthouse on the bluff overlooking Portland Harbor, now Barcelona. The year before, Congress had declared Portland Harbor an official port of entry and established a post office. The name of the town and harbor was officially changed to Barcelona on September 9, 1836. The lighthouse was erected with the expectation that Barcelona would become an important commercial city. Those expectations were never realized. In 1852, a railroad was built along the lakeshore, taking with it much of the commercial shipping business from Barcelona Harbor. By 1859, the Lighthouse Board had decided that the Barcelona Lighthouse was no longer needed, and the light was decommissioned, a mere 30 years after it was built. The harbor, however, did see a lot of activity before the advent of the railway. Its spacious docks were often filled with goods ready for transport on wagon trains headed over the hills to the waterways of the south and west. Barcelona's commercial fishing trade was started in 1852 and grew rapidly because of the railroad. A report in the local paper in 1863 states that there were 162 sailing vessels counted off Barcelona Harbor that morning. Upon the lighthouse's completion in 1829, Joshua Lane, a local clergyman who was deaf, was selected as its first keeper. He was lightkeeper at Barcelona for nearly 20 years and was followed by 3 other keepers. At first, whale oil kept the light burning, but with the discovery of a nearby natural spring containing hydrogen gas, in 1831, the Barcelona Lighthouse became the first lighthouse in the world to be illuminated with natural gas. 2 miles of hollowed wooden pipes carried the gas to the lighthouse. The wooden pipes would occasionally fill with water, making it necessary to use oil for a short time. The gaslight was relit in 1962 by Iroquois Gas as part of National Gaslight Day. Barcelona, like other ports on the Great Lakes, was subject to immense storms that could seemingly pop up out of nowhere. The gale of October 18, 1844, was a storm well remembered by the residents of Barcelona. A letter from G.W. Patterson to his son details the destruction.
Dear son, we had the most horrid gale last Friday night. I went down to the harbor the next morning and saw what remained. The long pier was mostly gone. Camp's old store was nearly demolished. Eason's old office with his storehouse and all its contents, wharf and all, is all gone. Buck and Mitten's store was washed from its foundation. All the little buildings are scattered about town. John D. had 2 smut mills in the storehouse, We have found one of them, but the other is in the lake. The road that was traveled between the government workshop and the lake is no more. Charlie Lee was reported to have gone off with the storehouse, but by some means he got into the lighthouse and was saved. G.W. Patterson, October 24th, 1844.
The lighthouse on the site now is still the original, built in 1829, and as such is the oldest lighthouse on the chain of Great Lakes. The original lantern room is long gone, however. It was probably a birdcage lantern room. The lighthouse and keeper's residence have been privately owned since 1872. Over the years, rooms have been added to the original four-room keeper's cottage. The present owners have painstakingly renovated the house, taking care to keep the flavor of a lighthouse keeper's home. The land lighthouse stands on a bluff overlooking the entrance to the channel leading into Erie Harbor from Lake Erie. This light guided ships into the channel between the lake and harbor for 80 years. It is the third consecutive lighthouse tower at this site. Now known as the Land Lighthouse, it was first officially known as the Presque Isle Lighthouse. When a new lighthouse was constructed on Presque Isle in 1873, that one became known as the Presque Isle Light Station, and this one on the mainland was renamed the Erie Light Station. The name Land Lighthouse never appeared on any official documents of the time. The name apparently was coined locally. The first lighthouse on the site was 20 feet high and consisted of multiple oil lamps. It was built of crushed gray stone. By 1857, the tower had sunk so much it had to be torn down. A replacement tower, approximately 58 feet high, was constructed in 1858. The new lighthouse was built on almost the same site as the old one. Once again, though, the towers started sinking. In 1867, it had to be torn down. Investigators discovered a layer of quicksand far below the surface. The riddle of the sinking towers was solved. And this time, a third new lighthouse was built on top of a massive foundation, 200 feet from the site of the first two. This one operated until 1880, when the federal government ordered it closed. For the next 5 years, lighthouses on the Presque Isle Peninsula were the only welcoming beacons illuminating the approach to Erie Harbor. The public, however, protested the decision to close the Land Lighthouse. Mariners in particular were not happy about the decision. The Land Lighthouse was reconditioned and a new lens installed, which operated on mineral oil and could be seen for 17 miles. The lighthouse reopened in 1885 for a final 14 years. On December 26, 1899, the light went dark forever, and the lens was transferred to Marblehead Lighthouse in Ohio. For years, the lighthouse and its keeper's residence stood empty and neglected, home only to dozens of seagulls and pigeons. Vandals shattered windows and defaced the structures. In the late 70s, restoration of the two buildings was underway. The lantern room at the top of the light was replaced in 1990. So far, plans for replacing the lens itself have not been realized. The original lighthouse keeper's residence was built behind and to the west of the current keeper's house. It consisted of 3 rooms. The old house was torn down and a new residence built in 1867. In 1871, the roof on the keeper's residence was raised to provide 2 full stories and the house extensively renovated. In 1934, the city of Erie gained ownership and created a park open to the public. Caretakers approved by the city of Erie now live in the keeper's residence. The Presque Isle Light Station was needed to warn mariners of the 7-mile-long peninsula jutting out into Lake Erie on an otherwise straight coastline. Commissioned in 1870 and completed in 1872, it replaced the Presque Isle Light Station on the mainland, now called the Land Lighthouse. Initially, the tower was 40 feet. In 1896, the tower was raised 17 feet to increase the light's visibility. Charles Waldo became the first keeper of the light and was stationed there until 1880. The keeper had to climb the tower at least 4 times each night to check the oil supply, clean the lens, and reset the lens rotating mechanism. The light was operated from April to November or December each year, but the keeper and his family usually lived there year-round. Before the advent of the automobile and the construction of a road onto the peninsula, the station was often referred to as the loneliest place on Earth. Prior to the Presque Isle Lighthouse's construction, the peninsula was mostly just trees and sand, though there was a beacon light near the tip of the peninsula. It was a desolate, isolated place. Often in the 1800s, Lake Erie's pounding waves would shift the sand along the narrow stretch of land connecting the peninsula to the mainland, sometimes making it an island accessible only by boat. At one point, the break was deep enough that ships could get through. Indeed, even the construction of the lighthouse itself proved quite a challenge, as it was very difficult to get the building materials and men to the site. For many years, the keeper had to walk a narrow sand pathway 1.5 miles long that led to his boathouse on the other side of the peninsula. From there, he would take his boat into the city. Children at the light station walked this path to the bay and were rowed across the bay to school. In winter, they walked or skated across the ice. The trail was paved in 1925, becoming the peninsula's first roadway. A main road onto the peninsula was opened in 1927. The second keeper, Orrin J. McAllister, lasted only 8 days as keeper. He did not like the isolation of the lighthouse. 4 keepers after that served terms that lasted from 2 to 5 years. Today, the lighthouse is located on the grounds of Presque Isle State Park, established in May 1921. The keeper's residence is now used as employee housing and is private, but can be viewed from the beach. The interior of the residence still reflects a typical 19th century French design. The light itself is still in service. It was electrified in the 1920s. In 1962, the Fresnel lens was removed and a new lens made of plastic installed. The light is fully automated and maintained by the Coast Guard. The Presque Isle North Pier light is at the end of a short pier that juts into the waters of Lake Erie from Presque Isle State Park. The 30-foot-tall North Pier light offered mariners a key reference point for the turn into Erie Harbor. The first channel beacon light was constructed in 1828 and lasted until 1857, when a fall gale drove a schooner against it and knocked the light over. The following year, a cast-iron tower replaced it. It weighed 19 tons and ran first on lard oil and later mineral oil with a fixed 4th-order Fresnel lens. Meanwhile, the North Pier was lengthened and by 1880 was some 2,000 feet long. During the 1880 winter months, the cast-iron tower was moved 190 feet to the pier. In 1940, the lighthouse was moved once again, this time 509 feet to the east end of the North Pier and boxed in with heavy steel plating. The original Fresnel lens was donated to the Erie County Historical Society in 1995, and the light was fitted with a modern plastic lens. Keepers of this light lived in what is now the Coast Guard station at the tip of Presque Isle Peninsula. In severe weather, the keepers were transported to the lighthouse by what was called a breeches buoy, or a system of ropes and slings strung out over the surf between the shore and tower. Keepers would sit in the sling and be hauled over the raging waters to perform their duties. The light is now powered by solar energy. The U.S. Coast Guard maintains the light, which still welcomes boaters into Erie Harbor.
The light I've tended for 40 years is now to be run by a set of gears. The keeper said, "And isn't it nice to be put ashore by a mere device? Now fair or foul the winds that blow, or smooth or rough the sea below, it's all the same. The ships at night will run to an automatic light. That clock and gear which truly turn are timed and set so the light shall burn. But did ever an automatic thing set plants about in early spring? And did ever a bit of wire or gear a cry for help in the darkness hear? Or welcome callers and show them through the lighthouse rooms as I used to do? 'Tis not in malice these things I say, all men must bow to the newer way. But it's strange for a lighthouse man like me, after 40 years on shore to be. And I wonder now, will the grass stay green? Will the brass stay bright and the windows clean? And will that automatic thing plant marigolds in early spring?
Today, the lighthouses along the Seaway Trail stand as proud reminders of our maritime heritage. Each lighthouse has a history as unique as its architecture. Their stories are filled with folklore, legends of shipwrecks, heroic rescues, and romance. The lighthouses stand as witness to the many selfless people who lived in the lighthouse and kept the light burning, and to the countless number of lives saved because that light never wavered. As the years have worn on, our society has begun to recognize the need to preserve these sentinels of safety.
There are people that are drawn to lighthouses because of their symbolism, because they stand for a very altruistic act, a good part of human nature. They serve no self-serving function. They're there to help. They're symbols of solitude, independence, humanity. And I think people are drawn to that. And there's magic at the border of land and water, always magic. And lighthouses are right there.
There's magic in the power of public television, too. Where does that magic come in? When people like you invest in the programming and allow the programming to happen and continue, right, Wendy?
Absolutely. We're so lucky to have Mike Vogel here in the studio with us to encourage you to become a member of your public television station by calling 845-2200 and making sure you get a chance to, your last chance tonight, to get a copy of Lighthouses of the Seaway Trail, exclusively made available to you through WNED TV.
And it's a wonderful program to have, not only for yourself, but perhaps to give as a gift, maybe to share with a library in your community or a school, someone else who shares your passion for preservation and your passion for public television. We're looking to welcome 20 members in this membership opportunity. We got off to a little bit of a head start. We've welcomed 4 so far. So we are on our way, but we still haven't heard from you, and it's your call that's going to make this successful membership opportunity something that you can look back to with pride, too, knowing that you invested your dollars in member-supported WNED. 845-2200, 1-800-727-1017. The numbers to call to invest in public television and WNED. Tonight, we brought you an entire evening of local and regional programming that really would be of the best interest to you, because it's programming that took place in our neighborhood that has a local impact. You've visited Niagara Falls. Perhaps you've visited the Buffalo Lighthouse. Maybe you're someone like me who walks every day at the marina. Perhaps you've visited the Lighthouse at Barcelona or in Dunkirk or in Youngstown. Wonderful places right in our own community celebrated in this beautiful program tonight. The video is a keepsake and a treasure. At that $100 level, it's also a wonderful, tangible reminder of the night that you became a member of member-supported WNED. That's sent to you with our thanks for your membership pledge at the $100 level. Perhaps you're someone who would like to make a gift of this video to someone who's perhaps moved from our community, or perhaps to a school or a library in your community. We can certainly send that to you so you can view the program, or perhaps share it with someone special in your life, someone who shares that passion for preservation and the passion for public television. Member-supported WNED is also an entity that is worthy of your investment and worthy of your preservation. It's your member dollars that make the programming possible, and that's the important key right here. We are not beholden to commercial advertisers. We're beholden only to you. Certainly, you've heard the words of good, passionate preservationists tonight. That's what we're asking you to do. Be a passionate preservationist for public television. 845-2200, 1-800-727-1017. The numbers to call to invest your member dollars in your community and your community's only public television station. It's a worthy investment. It's one that will make you proud because you have a role in the programming. You become a partner with Ron Santora, our program director, when you invest your dollars in member-supported WNED. How do you do that? Your investment, your support makes his ability to purchase programming possible. He purchases programming that's appropriate to you, that suits your local and regional interests and needs, that suits our community. Make that investment now. It's a good one.
I have great news for you. We need to welcome you and 12 others to the phone to make their pledge of support, and we will make our goal for this break, which will be wonderful because it's absolutely your member dollars and your pledges of support when we whittle away at these goals that makes programming like this possible. PBS in Watertown is the station that produced this program, and Ron Santora heard about it and decided that this was a program that he thought you would appreciate seeing, and I think that it is truly in your hands now to let us know if this is a program that you enjoyed seeing. You can do that with a pledge of support. It's kind of like an audience meter to some degree. When we get feedback from you in the form of member dollars, we know that this is the direction that you would like your station to go in, your public television station here, WNED in Buffalo and Toronto. Our regional pride is with us tonight,